3 weeks ago, I was in Kolkata
Okay.
and went to Shantiniketan, and then
Okay.
traveled a bit in the Delta region, and I visited some homes of people who came from the part of Bengal, which now is Bangladesh, right?
Yeah.
They came to
Okay.
the Indian side, and something that I noticed is that small carpets is the thing they brought with them, right? And
Exactly.
if you look at these photos of the partition time, like people on trains and all this horrible thing that happens, but that they always have kind of a suitcase, and then sometimes they carry this carpet under their arm and bring it with them to the new home to bring the memories of the old space. So a lot of if you kind of occupy a space like in your drawing, right? If you occupy a space as a collective, everybody brings a little bit something and you create something new. But the things you bring tend to be the things that you would also bring if you would have to leave your home and then, make a new home, a temporary new home somewhere else. So a lot of
Exactly.
refugees, a lot of migrants, within a certain areas, less so the ones who have to cross deserts or oceans, but if you kind of do it within a certain area, you bring certain things with you. And I just noticed a couple of things where you said, this little thing on the shelf, it used to be in the possession of somebody for a long time. Then you put
Correct.
it in the shelf, and the act of putting it there kind of creates this new home or home away from home. And then of course you have this kind of a lot of conversations I had with old people who remembered their youth in the villages in Bangladesh, right? And they kind of, on one hand, they tend to tell you the same stories, like we used to have a big shrine, in our house, and we had a big courtyard, and we had this tree which gave us a lot of, I don't know, fruits or whatever it was. So that's very similar. But then they always have this one thing that connects them to their old place, right? Where all these kind of stories and remembrances have a focal point, and then through that you start a conversation. And what
Exactly.
fascinating.
Damian,
Can I?
holding the thread that when we used to have dinner, I mean, at end of the day, Navid used to point out, because of Navid traveled a lot from Zurich to Delhi, and he used to point out, this is one thing that we have uh, in our Zurich also, somebody gifted or this thing. So in that way, there are two things opened up. That one is that the tangible and intangible, and through those memories, we brought in more sense in that home, that few things, I mean, that the material are not present over there, but the memories of that material also made it more like a home, and reminiscing that the home which is not carrying in with hand or with physical space, but it's in our head. So that also made certain essence in that project.
Exactly. These personal items are very important to create a home-like feeling. And what we didn't told you is we also to transform this white cube gallery space into a lovely home feeling apartment. We also discussed it a lot about the light. So we changed the whole light situation in this gallery. So we put down all the spotlights which had, and then then we had a big discussion about the light, and um, Ravat and Boca Shushanta, they chose the tube lights, which was very bright. And I said, but this is too bright. We don't use this cool light. And they said, no, no, but our middle class home use this cool light, not this warm light. So this was a cultural difference, which
Yeah, I'm getting
So, I mean,
yeah.
this is also when you form a collective, you're a four man from four different occupations or specializations within your chosen fields, and you form this collective, right? So
Just leave it.
there is a diffusion of identity on one hand, and then on the other hand, there's within the project how you built it. There is this translocal element, right? So you said there was the pandemic, everybody was at home, and we all experienced this, right? We had these Zoom calls with each other over over long distances. I was in my home, but you had all this strange kind of translocal connectivity through this isolation, and then I mean, also with the carpet, I mean, so within our histories, these movements are stronger or less strong, right? But I mean, Navid's family comes, or part of his family comes from somewhere else. He now is part of my home, which is Zurich, right? So we share a home, Zurich, a town, but his family history comes from a different part than my history. And then he goes to India and goes to a defense colony. And within India, this is also something, right? I mean, a lot of people in Delhi, not so much defense colony, but other parts are very mixed, right? There's people from from all over India. I mean, it's also interesting that this project takes place in defense colony, which is a very specific place, right? It's a very how shall I put it? A very, it's kind of like a strangely isolated
boundary.
When you then go out of the gallery and you go to Defense Colony Market and you go to this Thai bar, where always the same people. I've been going there for 10 years, and it's always the same artists hanging out there, like every evening. Kind of this local global moment, but then it's very specifically. There's so many lawyers in Defense Colony. I always live in Defense Colony when I'm in
right.
So I have been to this gallery many times. I know the space.
It is a known space.
And although I tend to go more to Shrine than to this gallery. But it's a very specific thing. But in other areas, you have these moments of, like there's so many Bengalis living there, or people from the north or from the south, right? Which bring their own things. But the most defining characteristic is, I think, the food, right? I mean, which is so distinct and so, like, memories are the strongest, I think, for every one of us with food. So could you talk a little bit about, so you said, Bengali, right? Bengalis, I know few people, maybe some Japanese and Thai people, and the Bengalis are fucking obsessed with food, right?
Yeah.
So how did you cook? What kind of things did you cook? Did you kind of talk about
food
and what it meant?
I'm happy that we can also show this food topic in our exhibition, because it's always when we come together, it's a main topic for us, and it's it connects us. On Persian New Year I cooked Persian, but the other days we cooked Bengali style.
But it's very. Now you go ahead. You continue this.
It's very specific, right? It's like, oh, you need this very specific mustard oil to cook this very specific dish, because then it tastes exactly as it tasted. If I do this fish,
but so the fun part,
it's also connected to space and the dislocation of space, right?
The fun part about all three of us, or at least two of us amongst three, I'm not talking of Naveed. Naveed is also moved and he's migrated. All three, at least our families have migrated from Bangladesh side to India. I mean, kind of, So we are migrant families. We have not seen partition with our own lives, but the partition is on. It's ongoing process. This migration is happening continuously. So we are childs of that. We are, the future of that same movement. So our food is not only about the west of West Bengal side, but also the east of West Bengal. We are constantly debating food and how it's cooked, and because even in specific regions of Bengal, the food is very different. The west and east is always a point of debate in Bengal itself. So this movement of food, when we went to Zurich, we had a 1-month residency which Naveed had organized for us. So all 4 of us were there in Zurich. We were staying at.
It is a project. It was a project, summer project.
Project actually, and we were every day cooking, and rice would be our main staple, and so food, of course. Sometimes it's also the memory of food, or that absence of particular food and spices, which are also very interesting. So Naveed, the last time, when he was making the Persian rice, the Iranian rice he was making for another Iranian friend we had invited, unfortunately could not land up there that day. So he was in absence of something. of that particular spice or bukhara.
Plum.
We call it bukhara. Yeah, plum, dried plum he wanted.
Dried
And
plum.
then Naveed said a very interesting word. He said, Ki, imagine this with the dried plum.
Exactly.
So we had it imagining that we had dried plum in that rice. So yeah, that was fun. So it's also almost this engagement of when we move into certain spaces of that absence, more than presence, we also look at the absence of particular things which if we can imagine in our palette.
It's also, I think, like this moment of cohabitation, right? So you form a collective, which is a virtual thing. You send each other these files and then print it out on your different printers in your different colors. But these moments of actually coming together physically and then changing this white cube into a living space and then actually living there and inviting people there to kind of activate the space is a very, I think in this moment in time, from my perspective as a European looking at India, it's a very political act, right? I'm always astonished when I have this discussion with, let's say, the more current government affiliated people in India that have this idea of this, that they know what India is or what Indian culture is or even what friggin' Hinduism is, right? It's like, from my point of view, of course, you're all Indian, like the three of you are Indian. But as you said, like the families come from all these different parts. You use different mustard oils to do different dishes, right? It probably grew up speaking different languages. Now we speak English as the colonial language, which became the kind of intellectual language of India. But there's no such thing as a collective, right? There's no collective Indian history. But in the moment that you move in together and you kind of make this new collective, you also propose an alternative to these ideas of unification, right? By bringing your individual things in together in this temporary manner. And I think that's something that also needs to be discussed. I understand that it needs to be done delicately at this moment in time, but still, it's these different ideas of what cohabitation or a shared room actually means and how it can be looked at. I think that's also a very interesting aspect to do that in this current climate and the specific location that you chose to do it. In Switzerland, it means something else, right? We have this different idea of nationhood, which is exactly that people from different things come together, they form a coalition, but it's always clear that it's a form of cohabitation and that most of the rights stay with the local, because we don't have a really centralized government, that it stays with the local areas. I think this idea of transmigration in the way that Nina Glick-Schiller defined it in the 90s, and then the idea of the translocal and of the space and of cohabitation. There's so many different topics you touch, right? So I think the question now would be, as a curator, I would ask you, so how do you, this will end, the gallery will change back into a gallery and they will try to sell and maybe fail to sell things in the gallery space. What do you take from there? So you have these works which are framed, like these chainmail works, which are, and you even have designed a kind of archival space for that. But what else kind of could come out of this experiment or this moment of creating this living sculpture together?
Yeah, well, actually we were focused on the process and all the works, also the chain works we sent it before are also representing a process. And the living in this space, inviting guests, we looked always to show up artworks which not end, or they have a continuation. Yes.
I felt that this idea of when we were inviting people to walk into this space, and it's a very intangible way of looking at it. So when they come in and if they get it, that it's suddenly transformed into a living space, and these memories, nostalgia, intimacy, and privacy, which they either encounter or they don't in any other living space. So that itself is kind of intangibility of this work. So it is not very tangible in nature, except for those series of 4 works which you saw in that laboratory space. The rest is a very it's an idea, I would say. It's an idea of a living space or idea of a home, and this is an idea which is transformed by four collective members. So it's a very tough call, because if each of us was designing this space, would have been very different.
Of course.
But it's not. It's a very tough thing when 4 of us who have extremely different tastes also at times, how do they cohabit this space? So this is what we felt was when there's a 5th person or a 6th person coming into this space, and that probably completes or kind of transforms, or that's the intangibility. That's the tangible intangibility of the work in a way.
Another thing is that Damian, when we were in the process of building up this space, the space itself actually inviting to build up more ideas. So in a sense, every day living in the space and recording those spaces, not with the devices, through our eyes and our living into the space. And when visitor comes and friend comes, and they also, I mean, spending time into that space also, they start speaking about different histories, about books, about films, about certain political things. So those are also, we are storing in our head in a way. So maybe that could give birth of certain works, even if it doesn't give birth of any works or extension of our practice. But living in the space and germinating those ideas are also fulfilling each and every day's experiences. So that was our one of the most important notions to build up this space. So building up this space is not the end product of our work. It's actually evolving. So that was the idea of it. So in a sense that you are planting a seed and let's see how it grows.
It's a continuation, and of course it's not just an idea, as you say. It's more than that, because it's based on the shared experience, right? So it's an idea which was before the shared experience and which might change through the shared experience. And the question really is what comes next, right? How do you
exactly
how do you
and we are not
take this as a starting point, and how radical do you become? Because of course, this idea of transforming a gallery space into a living space is something that art historically has been done before in different ways by different artists and collectives. And something that always kind of struck me with these experiments was that in most cases, then that was it, right? That was the performative aspect. It ended. And so what really would interest me is then exactly what you started to say now. So how does this idea and this shared experience that kind of informed this new idea, how does this lead to new collective practices in different ways, right? So this would be my final question to you.
I would, I mean, it's a very difficult, complex question which we are grappling with right now. But I would also like to tell you that this was the first time we kind of worked in a white cube space. Essentially, we normally like to work in public spaces or in certain site-specific spaces. So maybe we would continue, or maybe bounce onto that other space when space also, in this case it was a white cube, so the space here was also an imagination, inward or outward imagination of what all 4 of us were imagining. Maybe when we change the space, maybe some of these ideas could fluctuate. And what was interesting was also this, some things which were not controllable. So like a baby you can't control, right? So I mean, we're also looking at the kind of how do we look at layout collective? What is a collective? These questions were popping up, and we were also looking at is layout a baby of four of us? For instance, if you look at a non-conjugal baby or something. So how is that possible? Can you control that living thing or non-living thing called layout? So these were questions we were grappling with, and as a collective always. So these interventions by others, which are our audience or our friends, maybe that will lead us to certain directions, which we are not yet clear about. But that's we wanted to get these points across for us.
I think for our practices, we learned a lot, and I think we made one step further. Also, our first exhibition in 2012 was in a way radical because it was something new, which also transformed the space very differently. But this time we made it even more radical, and we built up really. We were searching for this unity or this recreating all together one word, not a group show of. That was always our approach. And this time we said, okay, we built up this set, this living space, and the main part is also the guests, what are bringing the, and we opened up, and this was one step further we made in our practice, and this could continue more in the next project. And this was very good, and for our collective, it was also a good experience to create a home for us, and to learn each other better. Also, we started through the pandemic by the Zoom meeting. We told during this time we told a lot about us and about our childhood. We get more in touch. So this collective,
So I have two inputs of this short insight into this practice from my curatorial perspective. One interesting thing was I visited the first Kochi Biennale. I told you this, Navid, a long time ago, right?
Yeah, that was not open.
And the thing was, it was very difficult to get in, right? Because it wasn't fucking open. So, I went and wanted to visit it because I knew that this artist from Switzerland was participating. I wanted to see it. It was not open. I went back to the main venue, right, and said, it's not open. Oh, we cannot do anything about it. And I asked Bose, can you make it open? And he said, yeah, come and open it, and then I went back and Bose came and I forgot the keys. And so it was very difficult to open. But at the end, when I finally, entered it, it was something special, right? So, I mean, you can go, basically, I mean, there's more options, of course, but the way, from my perspective, I see it, you could go into very different radical directions with what you've done now, right? So one thing is you could create shared spaces that are not open and look at what that means, right? I mean, so take it back. So you create a real physical space, but then only make it accessible through, I don't know, cameras or feeds or whatever, so that the virtual moment of your collaboration becomes the main topic again. Or you could go radically in a different way and say, okay, it started out from these private spaces, and we had these conversations in lockdown, where everybody was really in his cave, so to speak, and we connected through the internet. It could also be interesting to take it back into these private spaces, but change the private spaces to collective spaces. So a very radical and maybe completely not doable, because wives and children and everybody might not be happy about it. But it would be very interesting if you would then go to each of your 4 individual homes and change one room, and that then the person would have to live with this collective room, let's say for a year or something, and see how that would then change the whole thing, right? So there's a lot of ideas how you can take this further, besides the obvious ways of doing a publication or a web, publication or whatever, that you can actually kind of continue this practice and change the setting so as to find out new things through these changed settings.